Vanessa Mitchell's finger hovers over the send button, her designer suit contrasting with the economy seat they forced her into. The flight attendant who denied her first-class tickets smirks nearby. One press, and 4 major airports will grind to a halt. She smiles and taps the screen. Before we dive into this incredible story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Has anyone ever underestimated you because of how you look? This powerful story about standing up to discrimination will leave you speechless. Hit that subscribe button and like this video to support more content that reveals the reality many face daily. Now, let's discover how one woman's stand against injustice brought an entire airline industry to its knees. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Vanessa Mitchell's downtown Chicago penthouse as she meticulously packed her Rimowa suitcase. At 38, Vanessa had achieved what many considered impossible. As the founder and CEO of Teknova Solutions, she had revolutionized the aviation industry with FlightSync, a sophisticated flight management software now powering 70% of North American commercial flights. Her journey hadn't been easy. Growing up in South Chicago with a single mother who worked 3 jobs, Vanessa learned early that she would need to work twice as hard to get half as far. Her mother had scraped together enough to send her to coding camp one summer when she was 12, igniting a passion for technology that would define her life. "You've got the investor meeting at 2, her assistant reminded her through the speakerphone as Vanessa selected a crisp navy pantsuit from her closet. "Thank you, Amara. The presentation is ready, and I've reviewed all the materials," Vanessa replied, her voice steady and confident despite the butterflies in her stomach. This meeting with international investors could expand FlightSync globally, potentially doubling Teknova's valuation overnight. She paused to look at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back at her had overcome tremendous odds to stand where she was today. From being the only black woman in her computer science program at MIT to facing countless rejections when seeking initial funding for Teknova, Vanessa had persisted through it all. Her phone rang again. It was Dr. Eleanor Washington, her former professor and longtime mentor. "Today's the big day," Eleanor said warmly. "How are you feeling?" "Ready as I'll ever be," Vanessa replied, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "If this deal goes through, we'll be expanding to European and Asian markets by next quarter." "Just remember what we've talked about," Eleanor cautioned, her voice taking on a more serious tone. "The higher you climb, the more they'll try to remind you that they think you don't belong there." Vanessa nodded, though her mentor couldn't see her. "I know. I've dealt with it my entire career." "That's why you're extraordinary," Eleanor affirmed. "Your ability to navigate these waters with grace while never compromising who you are is your superpower." After ending the call, Vanessa finished packing and headed downstairs where her driver waited to take her to O'Hare International Airport. As she settled into the backseat of the town car, her phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from Richard Whitman, COO of Legacy Aviation, a competitor who had been trying to undermine Teknova for years. The email was ostensibly congratulatory about her upcoming international deal, but Vanessa could read between the lines. "I hope the pressure of global operations won't be too much for your small team to handle," he'd written, the condescension barely veiled. Vanessa deleted the email without responding. Richard had been a thorn in her side since Teknova began gaining significant market share 3 years ago. As a white man in his 50s who had inherited his position through family connections, he represented the old guard of aviation technology, the very system Vanessa had fought to disrupt. The car pulled up to O'Hare's departures level, and Vanessa stepped out, immediately adopting the confident posture she had perfected over years, of entering rooms where she was often the only black woman. Her first-class ticket to New York was securely in her Teknova app, and her carry-on contained everything she needed for the most important meeting of her career. Little did she know that this routine business trip would become a turning point, not just for her, but for an entire industry that had long turned a blind eye to discrimination within its ranks. Vanessa walked with purpose through O'Hare's bustling terminal, her Louboutin heels clicking against the polished floor. She had taken this same flight to New York dozens of times, always in first class, always with the same airline. As the CEO of a company that provided essential software to the aviation industry, she made it a point to rotate which airlines she used. both to maintain relationships and to experience their service firsthand. Today, she approached the premium check-in counter with her digital boarding pass ready on her phone. The line was short, with just one elderly white couple being assisted ahead of her. When it was her turn, she stepped forward to the counter, where a gate agent named Cameron Parker looked up at her, his smile faltering slightly as his eyes took her in. "Good morning," Vanessa said pleasantly, sliding her ID and pulling up her boarding pass. "First class to LaGuardia." Cameron glanced at her ID, then back at her face, then down at his computer screen. Mitchell, he muttered as if he couldn't find her reservation, despite the digital boarding pass clearly visible on her phone. "It's right here," she said, turning her phone toward him to show the QR code. Cameron squinted at it. "And you said first class?" His tone suggested disbelief. "Yes," Vanessa confirmed, maintaining her professional demeanor. "As usual." "Are you sure you're in the right line? This is the premium check-in," Cameron explained slowly, as if speaking to someone who might not understand English well. Vanessa felt the familiar tightening in her chest that came whenever someone questioned her belonging in spaces she had more than earned the right to occupy. "I'm positive. I'm a platinum member, and I'm booked in first class, as my boarding pass indicates." Cameron frowned and clicked through his computer several more times than necessary. "There seems to be some discrepancy here. Let me call my supervisor." While they waited, Vanessa noticed a white businessman approach another check-in counter. He was processed in under 30 seconds and sent on his way with a warm smile. The contrast wasn't lost on her. A few minutes later, a woman with a supervisor badge approached. Her name tag read, Melissa Brooks. "What seems to be the problem, Cameron?" she asked, not acknowledging Vanessa directly. "Ms. Mitchell here believes she has a first-class ticket, but I'm not seeing it in the system correctly," Cameron explained, emphasizing the word believes in a way that made Vanessa's skin crawl. Melissa finally turned to Vanessa. "May I see your confirmation?" Vanessa displayed both her digital boarding pass and the email confirmation she had received when booking. Both clearly showed her first-class seat assignment, 2A. Melissa looked at the phone, then back at her computer. "I see the issue," she said after a moment. "It looks like there was a system error with your booking. According to our records, you're actually booked in economy." "That's not possible," Vanessa stated firmly. "I personally booked this ticket 3 weeks ago. First class seat 2A. I received confirmation and my app shows my assigned seat. I've been charged for first class." "Sometimes these technology glitches happen," Melissa said with a condescending smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Perhaps there was a misunderstanding when you booked." Vanessa felt her patience wearing thin but kept her voice measured. "There was no misunderstanding. I've flown first class on this route at least 20 times this year alone. I'd like you to honor my confirmed seat." Cameron and Melissa exchanged a look that spoke volumes. Meanwhile, another white passenger approached the counter next to them and was promptly checked in for first class without any verification beyond a quick scan of his boarding pass. "I'm afraid all our first-class seats are occupied for this flight," Melissa stated flatly. "We can accommodate you in economy, or you can choose to book a different flight." Vanessa checked her watch. Her investor meeting was in just a few hours, and this was the last direct flight that would get her there on time. The deliberate humiliation stung, but missing the meeting would be catastrophic for her company. "May I speak with the lead gate agent or the captain?" Vanessa asked, still maintaining her composure. "They're currently unavailable," Melissa replied too quickly. "And we need to finish processing passengers. If you want to make this flight, you'll need to accept the economy seat. We can offer you a voucher for the inconvenience." Several nearby passengers had begun to take notice of the interaction. Some looked uncomfortable, others pretended not to see, and a few watched with undisguised curiosity. Not one stepped forward to support her. Vanessa made a swift calculation. She could cause a scene and likely still not get her rightful seat, potentially miss her flight and the crucial meeting, or she could document this incident and address it later. "Fine," she said quietly, accepting the economy boarding pass Melissa printed with a smug expression. "I'll need your full names for my records." Cameron's smirk faltered slightly. That won't be necessary. It is to me, Vanessa replied, taking a photo of their name badges with her phone before they could object. She also took screenshots of her original booking confirmation and first-class charge on her credit card. As she walked away toward the EEA security line, Vanessa heard Melissa mutter something about attitude to Cameron, who chuckled in response. The injustice of it all burned in her chest, but Vanessa held her head high. This wasn't her first encounter with discrimination, but something felt different this time. Perhaps it was because of how far she had come, or maybe it was the accumulated weight of all the time she had swallowed her anger for the sake of professionalism. Whatever it was, as Vanessa passed through security and headed toward her gate, she made a silent promise to herself. This time would be different. This time there would be consequences. The boarding process was already underway when Vanessa reached the gate. She watched as first-class passengers were welcomed aboard with warm smiles and offers of pre-flight beverages. When it was time for economy boarding, she joined the line, keenly aware of how different this experience was from her usual routine. The narrow aisle of the economy section seemed to close in around her as she made her way to seat 32B, a middle seat wedged between a man engrossed in his laptop and a woman already asleep against the window. Vanessa stored her designer carry-on in the overhead compartment and squeezed into her assigned seat, her knees pressing uncomfortably against the seat in front of her. As the plane filled with more passengers, Vanessa's mind drifted to similar experiences throughout her career. There was the time a potential investor had mistaken her for the secretary at her own pitch meeting. The countless instances of being interrupted or having her ideas attributed to male colleagues. The security guard who had stopped her, and only her, when she entered the executive floor of a client's building. Each time she had chosen to rise above, to be the bigger person, to not make a scene, to prove her worth through excellence rather than confrontation. It was what successful Black professionals were told they had to do: work twice as hard, never show anger, always be impeccable. But what had that approach really achieved? Here she was, the CEO of a company whose technology these very airlines depended on, being treated like an imposter. The flight attendant named Jessica Reynolds moved through the cabin, performing final checks before takeoff. When she reached Vanessa's row, their eyes met briefly. Vanessa smiled politely, but Jessica's gaze quickly slid away, as if recognizing her from the check-in counter drama. "Excuse me," Vanessa said. "Could I have a glass of water before takeoff?" Jessica hesitated. "We'll be serving beverages after we reach cruising altitude," she replied curtly before moving on, though Vanessa noticed her offering a water bottle to an elderly white passenger just a few rows ahead. The small slight added to the mounting evidence that this treatment was not random. It was methodical, pervasive, and all too familiar. Did they experience this same discrimination? Type yes in the comments if you've ever been treated differently based on your appearance. Hit the like button if you believe we need to expose these everyday injustices. And if you're wondering whether Vanessa should continue to rise above or finally take a stand, subscribe to see what happens next. What would you do if you were in Vanessa's position? Would you stay quiet to keep the peace, or would you use your power to demand change? As the plane reached cruising altitude, Vanessa discreetly connected to the in-flight Wi-Fi. She opened her email and began composing a message to her executive team, documenting the morning's events while they were still fresh in her mind. As she typed, she overheard a conversation between Jessica and another flight attendant who had paused in the aisle near her seat. "Can you believe the attitude?" Jessica whispered, just loud enough for Vanessa to hear. "These people get one good job and suddenly think they own the place." "I know," the other attendant replied. "First class isn't for everyone. Some people just don't know their place." Vanessa's fingers froze over her phone's keyboard. These people. Their place. The words hung in the air. Confirmation that this wasn't about a system error or a misunderstanding. It was about who belonged where, according to their prejudiced worldview. Taking a deep breath, Vanessa changed the recipient list on her email. Instead of just her executive team, she added her company's legal counsel and the head of research. She asked them to quietly pull data on discrimination complaints against this particular airline. especially those filed by Black executives or professionals. Within 30 minutes, a response landed in her inbox. Her research team had found multiple complaints filed against the airline over the past 5 years, with a pattern emerging. Black business and first-class passengers were disproportionately challenged about their seating assignments, subjected to additional security checks, or provided substandard service compared to their white counterparts. The data confirmed what Vanessa had suspected. This wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a systemic problem. And as she scrolled through the testimonials of other Black professionals who had endured similar humiliations, something shifted inside her. For years, she had bought into the idea that success meant enduring these indignities with grace, that speaking out would brand her as difficult or angry, labels that could derail her career. But now, sitting in that cramped economy seat, while her rightful place in first class was likely occupied by someone who hadn't faced the same scrutiny, Vanessa saw the situation with new clarity. Her silence didn't just hurt her, it enabled this treatment to continue for others. Her acquiescence didn't earn her respect, it merely made her complicity more convenient for those perpetuating the discrimination. As the beverage cart finally reached her row and Jessica reluctantly served her with minimal eye contact, Vanessa made her decision. This time would be different. This time, she would use every resource at her disposal to ensure there were real consequences. Not just for her own vindication, but for every person who had ever been made to feel less than because of the color of their skin. The realization was both terrifying and liberating. Vanessa Mitchell, the composed professional who had built her success on navigating white spaces without causing discomfort, was about to become something else entirely, an agent of change who would no longer prioritize others' comfort over her own dignity. And as the plane continued its journey to New York, Vanessa began formulating a plan that would send shockwaves through an industry that had taken her technology, but not her humanity seriously. Vanessa's town car pulled away from LaGuardia Airport, merging into the dense New York City traffic. On the surface, she maintained her usual composed demeanor, spine straight, expression neutral, responses measured. But internally, her mind was racing, formulating a strategy that would ensure this incident didn't simply become another anecdote about the indignities Black professionals routinely endured. Her phone rang. It was Anthony Richardson, Technova's lead legal counsel, calling, as requested in her email from the plane. "I'm already at your hotel," Anthony informed her as she answered. "Got the first flight out when I saw your message. This is serious, Vanessa." "I know," she replied, watching the city skyline come into view. "Meet me in the lobby in 20 minutes." Upon arrival at the Langham Hotel, Vanessa spotted Anthony immediately, tall and distinguished in his tailored suit, a serious expression on his face. They headed directly to a private meeting room he had arranged. "Before we discuss options," Anthony began once they were seated, "I want to be clear about something. We could go the conventional route, file a discrimination complaint, possibly pursue a lawsuit. You'd likely win a settlement, they'd issue a public apology, promise to do better, and nothing would fundamentally change." Vanessa nodded. "Exactly why I wanted to talk strategy. This isn't about compensation or an apology. It's about creating actual consequences for systemic discrimination." Anthony leaned forward. "Then we need to consider leveraging Technova's position. FlightSync isn't just software to these airlines, it's their operational backbone." "The thought had crossed my mind," Vanessa admitted, recalling a memory from 4 years earlier. She remembered the skeptical faces of airline executives when she first presented FlightSync, how they had questioned whether a company led by a Black woman could really deliver mission-critical aviation software, how one had even joked within her earshot about affirmative action tech, how they had only taken her seriously after a white male investor had vouched for her company's capabilities. "We need to gather irrefutable evidence," Vanessa decided, "not just of my experience today, but of the pattern." Anthony nodded. "I've already submitted requests for the security footage from O'Hare, and our team is compiling a comprehensive report of discrimination complaints against this airline, focusing on similar incidents with Black passengers in premium classes." "Good, but we need more. Can we reach out to others who've experienced this? Create a coalition?" "Already on it," Anthony confirmed. Based on social media data and public complaints, we've identified 27 Black executives who've documented similar experiences with this same airline in the past 18 months alone. I've drafted outreach messages if you approve." Vanessa was impressed but not surprised by Anthony's thoroughness. It was why she had hired him. He understood that in corporate America, Black professionals couldn't just be good, they had to be exceptional. "Send them," she authorized. "And let's get Aisha Johnson involved." Aisha was an investigative journalist who had been researching discrimination patterns in the airline industry for years. Her involvement would ensure this story wouldn't be easily dismissed or buried. "There's something else you should know," Anthony said, his expression darkening. "We found communications suggesting Richard Whitman at Legacy Aviation has been cultivating relationships with this airline's executive team, specifically targeting our contract renewal next quarter." Vanessa's eyes narrowed. Richard's email that morning suddenly made more sense. He hadn't just been condescending, he'd been gloating because he thought he was orchestrating her downfall behind the scenes. "So this might not have been random," she concluded. "They might have had my name flagged." "It's possible," Anthony agreed. "Either way, it adds another dimension to our response strategy." Vanessa stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline as she considered her next move. The investor meeting was in less than an hour, and despite the morning's events, she needed to be fully present for it. But afterward, "Anthony, call James at the office. I need him to check if our emergency protocol access is still active." Anthony looked surprised. "The override system? That's only supposed to be used for critical safety situations, I know," Vanessa finished. "For now, I just need to know if it's operational. We won't decide anything until we see how the airline responds to our formal complaint." Anthony nodded, though his expression revealed concern about the direction Vanessa was considering. "I've spent my career being reasonable, professional, and accommodating," she said, reading his thoughts. "I've smiled through insults, worked around barriers, and pretended not to notice when I was the only one being scrutinized. And what has it gotten me? A company that relies on my technology still felt comfortable putting me in my place today." She turned from the window, a new resolve hardening in her eyes. "Sometimes, Anthony, the only language corporations understand is their bottom line. If they want to show me that my dignity is worth less than their prejudice, I'm prepared to show them exactly how much that prejudice will cost them." The determination in her voice left no room for doubt. Vanessa Mitchell was no longer playing by rules designed to keep her at a disadvantage. She was about to rewrite them entirely. 3 hours after her successful investor meeting, Vanessa sat in her hotel suite, reviewing the formal complaint Anthony had drafted to the airline's executive team. The document was comprehensive, detailing not only her experience, but placing it within the context of 27 similar incidents documented by other Black executives and professionals. Her phone rang with an unknown number. "Vanessa Mitchell speaking," she answered. "Ms. Mitchell, this is Benjamin Hayes from Customer Relations at Atlantic Airways," came a practiced, solicitous voice. "I'm calling regarding the, misunderstanding at O'Hare this morning." Vanessa put the call on speaker so Anthony could hear. "It wasn't a misunderstanding, Mr. Hayes. It was discrimination, as detailed in the formal complaint my legal team submitted an hour ago." There was a pause. "Well, we certainly regret any impression of unfair treatment," Benjamin continued, his tone suggesting this was a routine customer dissatisfaction call. "We value all our passengers and would like to offer you a voucher for future travel as a gesture of goodwill." "A voucher," Vanessa repeated flatly, "for being humiliated and denied the first-class seat I purchased because of racial bias. Now, Ms. Mitchell, we can't know that was the reason. I have evidence suggesting otherwise, Mr. Hayes. Security footage, witness statements, and documentation of a pattern of similar incidents targeting Black passengers. A voucher is not an appropriate response." Benjamin's voice turned frosty. "What exactly are you looking for, Ms. Mitchell? If it's financial compensation, we have procedures." "I'm looking for accountability," she interrupted. "Termination of the employees involved, a public acknowledgement of the discrimination pattern, and implementation of company-wide anti-bias training with measurable outcomes. That's not something I'm authorized to discuss, Benjamin stammered. I'll have to escalate this to our legal department. Please do, Vanessa replied calmly. They have 24 hours to provide a substantive response before we explore all available remedies. After ending the call, Vanessa turned to Anthony. They're not taking this seriously. No surprise there, Anthony replied, opening his laptop. Take a look at this. He showed her an internal communication from the airline that their team had obtained through a contact. The email, sent between management members after her complaint was received, contained the dismissive line, "These people always complain when they don't get special treatment. Offer the standard voucher and it'll go away." Vanessa felt a cold anger solidify in her chest. "These people," she repeated softly. Her phone buzzed with an incoming text from James, her chief technology officer. "Emergency protocol access confirmed. Operational. Awaiting your instructions." Meanwhile, across town at Atlantic Airways corporate headquarters, operations manager Diane Lewis frowned at her screen, reading Vanessa Mitchell's complaint. "We might want to take this one more seriously," she suggested to her supervisor Lawrence Stanford, the airline's CEO. "Technova provides our flight management software, and these allegations are concerning." Lawrence waved his hand dismissively. "It's the usual entitlement. Someone didn't get the royal treatment they think they deserve, so they cry discrimination. Send it to legal with the others." "But sir, there's evidence of a pattern here, and Mitchell is well connected. Her company is—" "I know who she is," Lawrence interrupted irritably. "Just because she runs a tech company doesn't mean she gets special handling. We've got dozens of complaints every day. Follow protocol." As Diane reluctantly filed the complaint, her phone lit up with a notification. Richard Whitman from Legacy Aviation was trying to reach Lawrence. She transferred the call. "Lawrence, good news," Richard's voice boomed through the speakerphone. "Our team has finalized the proposal to replace Technova's system with our Legacy Flight Command software. As discussed, we can offer a 10% discount if you sign before their contract renewal next quarter." Lawrence smiled. "Perfect timing, Richard. We just received a complaint from their CEO about some seating mix-up this morning. Might make the transition conversation easier if she's already unhappy with us." "Ah, yes, I heard something about that," Richard replied, his tone suggesting he knew more than he was letting on. "These tech startups never quite understand the complexities of airline operations, do they?" After the call ended, Diane sat uncomfortably with what she had overheard. It sounded as though the decision to move away from Technova had been made before any legitimate evaluation of Legacy's product, and possibly even before Vanessa Mitchell's complaint. Something felt off about the whole situation. Back at the Langham, Vanessa concluded her investor meeting with tremendous success. Despite the morning's disruption, she had secured international backing for FlightSync's global expansion. The deal would double Technova's valuation overnight and solidify her position as one of the most successful Black female tech entrepreneurs in America. As she signed the final paperwork, her phone buzzed with a message from Aisha Johnson. Story. Researched and ready. Overwhelming evidence of discrimination pattern at Atlantic. Publishing tomorrow with or without their comment. They've had 4 hours to respond and haven't. Vanessa thanked the investors and returned to her suite where Anthony waited with updates. "The airline employees who witnessed your incident are being pressured to stay quiet," he reported. "Our contact says they've been told any public statements could impact their employment." "Of course," Vanessa said, unsurprised. "And the airline's response to our complaint?" "Nothing substantive. Their legal team sent a boilerplate denial of any discriminatory intent and offered a first-class upgrade on your next flight." Vanessa shook her head, a sad smile playing on her lips. "They still don't get it. This isn't about a seat. It's about dignity and consequences." Her phone rang again. It was James, her CTO. "We've confirmed something interesting," he said when she answered. "The specific employees who denied your seat, Cameron Parker and Melissa Brooks, have been involved in at least 5 similar incidents with Black executives in the past year alone. And there's more. Richard Whitman from Legacy had lunch with Atlantic's CEO last week. The pieces were coming together. This hadn't just been random discrimination, it had potentially been orchestrated to undermine her and her company. Thanks, James. Is the diagnostic protocol ready if needed? Yes, he confirmed. One command from you, and we can initiate a system-wide diagnostic that would temporarily freeze their flight management operations. Completely legal under our contract's emergency access provisions. Vanessa took a deep breath. Using the emergency protocol wasn't a decision to make lightly. It was designed for critical safety situations, though technically, a system-wide diagnostic check was within her company's rights as the software provider. Let's give them until morning to make this right, she decided. If they continue to dismiss the severity of this situation, then we'll show them exactly how serious it is. As evening fell over New York, Vanessa received the airline's final official response. They would not be taking any meaningful action, maintained there was no evidence of discrimination, and considered the matter closed with their offer of a travel voucher. The message was clear. They believed there would be no real consequences for their actions. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Dawn broke over Manhattan as Vanessa stood at her hotel window, watching the city come alive. She hadn't slept much. The weight of the decision before her pressed heavily on her shoulders, not because she doubted the airline deserved consequences, but because she understood the far-reaching implications of what she was considering. Her phone rang. It was Dr. Eleanor Washington, her mentor. "I saw Aisha's article this morning," Eleanor said without preamble. "It's compelling, Vanessa. The evidence she's compiled of systemic discrimination at Atlantic Airways is damning. Yet their response was to offer me a voucher and suggest I was overreacting," Vanessa replied, her voice steady despite her fatigue. "So what will you do now?" Eleanor asked, knowing her former student well enough to sense she had a plan beyond conventional remedies. Vanessa took a deep breath. "I'm considering using Technova's emergency protocol access, a 30-minute system, diagnostic that would ground all Atlantic flights using our software." There was a long silence on the other end. "That's significant," Eleanor finally said. "The disruption would be massive." "It would," Vanessa agreed. "But so is the impact of the discrimination they perpetuate daily. They've made it clear. They don't take this seriously. So I need to speak in a language they understand, their operations and their profits. Have you considered the ethical implications, the passengers who would be affected?" "Extensively," Vanessa confirmed. "The diagnostic would be temporary, 30 minutes maximum. No flights in the air would be affected, only departures. Inconvenient, yes, but not dangerous. And our contract explicitly permits emergency system diagnostics at our discretion." "And you believe this is the only way?" "I've tried the other ways, Eleanor. For years I've been the reasonable one, the professional one, the one who doesn't make waves. Where has it gotten us? They still see me, someone whose technology they depend on, as just another black person they can put in their place." Eleanor sighed. "I understand, Vanessa. Just be prepared for the consequences. Not everyone will see this as justified no matter how right you are." "I know," Vanessa said softly, "but sometimes change only comes when the cost of the status quo becomes too high to bear." After ending the call, Vanessa opened her laptop and connected securely to Technova's servers. The emergency protocol system appeared on her screen, requiring her authorization to activate. James had prepared everything as requested, setting up a precisely timed 30-minute diagnostic that would affect all Atlantic Airways flights scheduled for departure from 4 major hubs: O'Hare in Chicago, LaGuardia in New York, Hartsfield-Jackson in Atlanta, and Dallas-Fort Worth. Her finger hovered over the authorization button. Was she really prepared to do this? To potentially impact thousands of travelers to make a point about discrimination? What would you do in Vanessa's position? Type stand. If you believe she should take this bold stand against discrimination, or wait if you think she should find another way. Like this video if you've ever had to make a difficult choice between keeping the peace and standing up for what's right. And subscribe to find out what consequences Vanessa faces for her decision. Would you risk your professional reputation to fight systemic injustice, or would you play it safe? Vanessa thought of all the people who had shared their stories after. Aisha's article was published. Hundreds of black passengers who had experienced similar treatment, whose dignity had been violated, whose complaints had been dismissed. She thought of the airline executives who believed they could continue this behavior without consequence because the victims had too much to lose by fighting back. She thought of her younger self, the girl from South Chicago, who had been told repeatedly that she didn't belong in the spaces she had fought to enter. And she thought of all the young black women and men watching her now, looking to see if someone with power would finally say, "Enough." Vanessa sent one final email to Atlantic Airways CEO, Lawrence Stanford. It was brief and to the point. "This is your last opportunity to acknowledge the discrimination that occurred, terminate the employees responsible, and commit to systemic changes. You have 1 hour to respond." The email went unread, sitting in Stanford's inbox as he attended his morning golf game. At precisely 9 a.m. Eastern Time, Vanessa entered her authorization code and activated the diagnostic protocol. On her screen, a countdown began. 30C, 2959, 2958. At O'Hare International Airport, Cameron Parker frowned at his terminal as it suddenly displayed an error message. "System entering diagnostic mode," it read. "Normal operations suspended. For maintenance. Estimated duration, 30 minutes. Similar messages appeared on screens throughout Atlantic's operation centers across the country. Gate agents found themselves unable to process boarding passes. Flight dispatchers watched as their systems froze, preventing the release of flight plans. Within minutes, confusion spread throughout Atlantic's terminal areas. Departure boards began showing delays for all Atlantic flights. Passengers gathered at gates, asking questions that flustered employees couldn't answer. At the FAA's Air Traffic Control Command Center, Thomas Rodriguez noticed an anomaly in the flight data coming from Atlantic Airways. "We've got a system-wide outage for Atlantic," he reported to his supervisor. "All their departures are going into holding patterns on the ground." The supervisor frowned. "Cyber attack?" "Doesn't look like it," Thomas replied, studying the incoming data. "The system reports it's in diagnostic mode. That's an internal function, not an external breach." As the clock ticked past the 5-minute mark, the impact was becoming apparent. 152 Atlantic flights scheduled for departure in the next half hour were now grounded. The ripple effects would impact hundreds more throughout the day, as aircraft and crews would be out of position. In the executive suite of Atlantic Airways, Lawrence Stanford's phone began ringing incessantly as he stepped off the golf course. "What do you mean all departures are frozen?" he demanded, his face reddening as he listened to the frantic explanation. "How is that possible? Override it." "We can't, sir," his operations director explained. "The diagnostic is controlled by Technova's core system. Only they can terminate it early." "Technova?" Lawrence repeated, suddenly remembering the unread email from Vanessa Mitchell. "Get her on the phone. Now." As the chaos unfolded exactly as planned, Vanessa sat calmly in her hotel suite, watching live news coverage of the disruption. The financial impact was already being calculated on business channels. $2.1 billion in combined losses for Atlantic and affected airports if the situation extended beyond the 30-minute window. Her phone rang. It was Lawrence Stanford himself, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "What have you done, Mitchell?" "I've initiated a system diagnostic, as permitted under Section 7.3 of our service agreement," she replied calmly. "It will conclude in approximately 22 minutes. This is sabotage. We'll sue you for every penny Technova has." "It's a scheduled maintenance procedure, Mr. Stanford. One you agreed to when you signed our contract. Perhaps if you had read my email this morning, this inconvenience could have been avoided." There was a momentary silence on the other end. "What do you want?" he finally asked, his tone shifting from anger to desperation as he watched the financial losses mounting by the second. "I want a meeting. Now. With you and your board. In person." "That's impossible. We're dealing with a crisis." "A crisis that will end in 20 minutes if I get my meeting, or could potentially recur if critical system instabilities are detected in the future," Vanessa replied, her voice steel beneath silk. Another pause. "Fine. Our headquarters. 1 hour. I'll see you then." Vanessa confirmed, ending the call. She closed her laptop, took a deep breath, and looked at Anthony, who had been listening to the exchange. "Phase 1 complete," she said. "Now comes the hard part." Chaos reigned at airports across the country. At O'Hare, Atlanta, LaGuardia, and Dallas-Fort Worth, Atlantic Airways terminal areas had transformed into scenes of confusion and mounting anger. Departure boards uniformly displayed "delayed" across all Atlantic flights, while customer service counters were swamped with frustrated passengers demanding explanations. "We apologize for the inconvenience," a harried gate agent announced at O'Hare's Terminal 3. "We're experiencing a temporary system issue affecting all departures. We expect to resume operations shortly." Behind the scenes, the situation was far more dire. Atlantic's operations center resembled a war room, with executives and IT specialists frantically trying to regain control of their grounded fleet. Every attempt to override the diagnostic mode failed, each error message reinforcing the reality that they were at Technova's mercy. "The financial impact is catastrophic," reported Atlantic's CFO during an emergency conference call. "We're looking at $2.1 billion in combined losses if this extends beyond an hour. That includes direct costs, compensation claims, and reputationally non damage." The news had spread like wildfire through the industry. Stock trading platforms showed Atlantic Airways shares plummeting as investors reacted to the unprecedented operational failure. Business news channels had interrupted regular programming to cover the developing story. In an extraordinary turn of events, Atlantic Airways has grounded all departures at major hubs due to what they're calling a system diagnostic, reported a CNBC anchor. Industry sources are questioning how a routine maintenance procedure could have such a devastating impact without contingency measures in place. In Atlantic's boardroom, Lawrence Stanford paced nervously, checking his watch every few seconds. "How much longer?" he barked at his IT director. "According to the system, 17 minutes until the diagnostic completes," came the reply. "Unless Technova terminates it manually. And there's absolutely nothing we can do to override it?" The IT director shook his head. "Their software architecture gives them ultimate control over system diagnostics. It's in the contract we signed." Lawrence slammed his fist on the table. "Get Richard Whitman on the phone, now." Moments later, Richard's voice filled the room. Via speakerphone. "Lawrence, what the hell is happening? It's all over the news." "Technova has locked us out of our own systems," Lawrence explained tersely. "They're running some kind of diagnostic that's grounded our entire operation." There was a pause. "This is about Mitchell, isn't it?" Richard finally said. "The incident yesterday." "You knew this could happen?" Lawrence demanded, his face reddening further. "Not this specifically," Richard backpedaled. "But I warned you. She was dangerous. That's why we've been working on replacing her system with ours." "Well, your replacement better be ready immediately, because I'm about to fire Technova as soon as we regain control." Richard cleared his throat. "About that, our system won't be fully operational for at least 6 months, and the migration would take another 3. Lawrence's expression turned ashen as the implications sank in. "You're telling me we're completely dependent on Technova for the foreseeable future?" "Unfortunately, yes," Richard admitted. "FlightSync is deeply integrated into your operations. There's no quick replacement." As this reality dawned on the Atlantic executives, social media was exploding with speculation about the cause of the disruption. Hashtags like #Atlantic Grounded and #Flight Chaos were trending worldwide. Some users had already connected the dots between Aisha Johnson's article about discrimination at Atlantic and the current situation. Anyone else find it interesting that Atlantic Airways is experiencing this technical issue right after being exposed for systematically discriminating against black passengers? One viral tweet read, "Technova's CEO Vanessa Mitchell was one of those passengers yesterday. Technova provides their flight software. Just saying." At the FAA's command center, the situation had initially been treated as a potential security threat. Thomas Rodriguez and his team had immediately begun investigating for signs of external hacking or sabotage. "It's definitely not a breach," Thomas confirmed after analyzing the data. "The diagnostic protocol is a legitimate function within FlightSync, initiated through proper authorization channels. So someone at Technova triggered this deliberately? His supervisor asked. Looks that way, Thomas replied. And technically they're within their rights. The service agreement gives them authority to run diagnostics when they deem necessary. Get Homeland Security on the line anyway, the supervisor ordered. This level of disruption to national air transportation needs oversight regardless of contractual technicalities. Meanwhile, in her town car heading to Atlantic's headquarters, Vanessa received a call from her public relations director. The media is connecting the dots, she was informed. Your incident yesterday, Aisha's article, and now the system diagnostic. They're requesting statements. No comment until after my meeting with Atlantic, Vanessa directed. But monitor the conversation closely. Just as her car pulled up to Atlantic's corporate building, Vanessa's phone rang again. This time, it was Lawrence Stanford himself. The diagnostic has completed, he said, his voice tight with controlled fury. But the damage is done. This meeting better be worth it, Mitchell. Oh, it will be, Vanessa assured him, stepping out of the car where Anthony waited for her, because you're finally going to understand exactly who you're dealing with. As they walked toward the entrance, Anthony leaned close. They've called in representatives from the FAA and Homeland Security, he whispered. They're trying to frame this as a security issue. Vanessa nodded, unsurprised. Let them. We've operated within our legal rights, and now they know exactly how much their discrimination costs. The security guard at the reception desk did a double take when he saw her, having clearly been briefed about her arrival. Ms. Mitchell, he said nervously. They're waiting for you in the main boardroom. As Vanessa and Anthony entered the elevator, they knew they were headed into a confrontation that would either change an industry or potentially end Technova. Either way, there would be no returning to the status quo where discrimination could continue without consequence. The elevator doors opened, revealing a corridor leading to Atlantic's executive suite. Vanessa straightened her shoulders and walked forward with the confidence of someone who had just demonstrated precisely how much power she held. In the boardroom ahead, a group of men in expensive suits waited tensely, their expressions a mixture of anger, fear, and dawning respect. They had dismissed her dignity yesterday. Today, they had learned they couldn't afford to dismiss her power. The boardroom fell silent as Vanessa Mitchell entered, followed by Anthony. 12 pairs of eyes tracked her movement as she calmly took a seat at the opposite end of the long table from Lawrence Stanford. The tension in the air was palpable, a mixture of hostility, disbelief, and newfound wariness. You've made your point, Ms. Mitchell, Lawrence began, his attempt at maintaining composure betrayed by the slight tremor in his voice. Now you've got your meeting. I hope you realize the legal consequences of what you've done today will be severe. Vanessa placed her portfolio on the table, her movements unhurried and deliberate. Before we discuss consequences, Mr. Stanford, I'd like to introduce everyone present. She gestured to Anthony. This is Anthony Richardson, Technova's chief legal counsel. Then she turned to the strangers in the room. And you gentlemen are? A stern-faced man in a government-issue suit spoke up. Thomas Wilson, Federal Aviation Administration. This is Agent Clark from Homeland Security. We're here to investigate the disruption to critical transportation infrastructure. Vanessa nodded respectfully. Thank you for coming. Your presence will be valuable as we discuss the systemic issues that led to today's diagnostic procedure. Systemic issues? Lawrence scoffed. You deliberately sabotaged our operations because of a seating misunderstanding. There was no misunderstanding, Vanessa corrected, her voice calm but firm. What happened yesterday was a clear instance of racial discrimination, consistent with a pattern of similar incidents involving black passengers on your airline. Anthony, would you please distribute the evidence packages? Anthony handed folders to everyone present. Inside was Aisha Johnson's comprehensive report, supplemented with affidavits from 27 black executives who had experienced similar discrimination, statistical analyses showing disproportionate verification of black first-class passengers, and internal communications revealing a culture that normalized such treatment. This is a fishing expedition, sputtered Harold Jenkins, Atlantic's chief legal officer. A collection of anecdotes doesn't prove systemic bias. Page 12, Vanessa directed. You'll find internal emails between gate managers explicitly, instructing staff to verify black passengers in premium classes more frequently because they're more likely to be in the wrong section. The FAA representative frowned as he read the document. These communications appear authentic. Is this accurate, Mr. Stanford? Lawrence glared at Vanessa instead of answering. Whatever complaints you have could have been addressed through proper channels. Instead, you chose to hold our entire operation hostage. I did attempt proper channels, Vanessa countered. My formal complaint was dismissed with an offer of a travel voucher. But more importantly, the proper channels have failed the 27 people in those documents, not to mention countless others who didn't have the resources or platform to speak up. She turned to the government officials. Gentlemen, what happened today was a scheduled system diagnostic, fully within Technova's rights under our service agreement with Atlantic Airways. Section 7.3 specifically permits us to conduct maintenance procedures when we identify potential system vulnerabilities. This was no maintenance procedure, Lawrence objected. This was retaliation. It was necessary system verification, Vanessa corrected. Given that Atlantic staff demonstrated yesterday they make operational decisions based on racial bias rather than factual data, we needed to ensure that bias wasn't affecting other aspects of system implementation. As the argument intensified, the boardroom door opened and Richard Whitman walked in, his presence unexpected by most in the room. Richard, Lawrence looked confused. What are you doing here? I came as soon as I heard the diagnostic had completed, Richard explained, smoothly, taking a seat. As your technology partner moving forward, I thought I should be present for this discussion. Vanessa smiled slightly. How convenient, Mr. Whitman. I was just about to address your role in this situation. Richard's confidence faltered. My role? I don't know what you're talking about. Vanessa opened her laptop and turned it toward the room. This is an email exchange between Mr. Whitman and Atlantic's terminal manager at O'Hare, dated 2 days ago. In it, he provides a list of VIPs to watch for, with my name highlighted, noting I should receive special attention to ensure proper verification of credentials. The color drained from Richard's face as his own words appeared on screen. That's taken out of context, he stammered. Is it? Vanessa challenged. Because it seems remarkably clear that you orchestrated yesterday's incident as part of your campaign to undermine Technova and replace our software with legacies. Inferior product. Lawrence turned to Richard, betrayal evident in his expression. You told me this was about legitimate business competition. You never mentioned targeting her personally. The authentication of that email is questionable, Richard attempted, looking desperately around the room for support and finding none. Agent Clark, Vanessa addressed the Homeland Security representative. I believe using corporate influence to orchestrate discriminatory treatment based on race might interest your department, particularly when it affects critical infrastructure providers. The agent nodded gravely. We'll certainly be investigating these allegations. As Richard squirmed uncomfortably, Lawrence Stanford seemed to realize his position was deteriorating rapidly. The evidence of discrimination was substantial, the collusion with Richard increasingly apparent, and the technical dependency on Technova undeniable. What exactly do you want, Ms. Mitchell? He finally asked, his tone notably more subdued. Vanessa closed her laptop and leaned forward. I want accountability and meaningful change, not just for me, but for everyone who has experienced discrimination at Atlantic Airways. She outlined her non-negotiable demands: public acknowledgement of the discrimination pattern, termination of the employees directly involved in her incident, company-wide anti-bias training with measurable outcomes, and the hiring of a chief diversity officer with actual authority. This is extortion, muttered one board member. This is consequence, Vanessa corrected, something that has been notably absent when it comes to discrimination in your company. The room fell silent. As the reality of their situation became clear, several board members whispered urgently to each other, calculating the financial implications of refusing Vanessa's terms versus the mounting losses from extended system instability. And if we refuse? Lawrence finally asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Then we would have serious concerns about Atlantic's commitment to implementing our technology properly, Vanessa replied evenly. Flight sync requires regular diagnostics to maintain optimal performance. Today's procedure was scheduled for 30 minutes. Future necessary diagnostics might require longer periods. The implied threat hung in the air. With 152 flights already grounded and cascading delays affecting hundreds more, the prospect of extended or repeated diagnostic episodes was unthinkable. You wouldn't dare, Lawrence challenged, but without conviction. Mr. Stanford, Vanessa said, her voice quiet but penetrating. Yesterday your employees decided I didn't belong in first class despite my valid ticket. Today I demonstrated that without Technova, your planes don't belong in the sky. Which of us has more to lose by continuing this confrontation? The board members exchanged glances, a silent consensus forming. Finally, Harold Jenkins, the legal officer, cleared his throat. Perhaps we should discuss these terms in more detail. As the negotiation proceeded, Richard Whitman attempted to slip out unnoticed, only to find his path blocked by Agent Clark. We'll need to ask you some questions about those emails, Mr. Whitman. Within an hour, documents were being drafted and signed. Atlantic Airways would make a public statement acknowledging the discrimination Vanessa had experienced and committing to systematic changes. Cameron Parker and Melissa Brooks would be terminated immediately. Anti-bias training would begin within 2 weeks, and a search for a qualified chief diversity officer would commence with Vanessa's input on the selection committee. As the last signature was applied, Vanessa stood and closed her portfolio. Gentlemen, I look forward to a more equitable relationship moving forward. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and Mr. Stanford? Flight Sync will continue operating normally now that our concerns have been addressed. But remember, we'll be watching very closely to ensure these changes aren't just on paper. With that, she walked out, leaving behind a room of powerful men who had just learned that discrimination wasn't just morally wrong. It was also bad for business. 1 month after what media outlets had dubbed the Flight Sync standoff, Vanessa Mitchell sat in her Chicago office watching CNN's business report. Atlantic Airways stock has rebounded following their comprehensive anti-discrimination initiative, the anchor announced. The airline's public acknowledgement of racial bias issues and subsequent reforms have been praised by industry watchdogs and civil rights organizations alike. The screen showed footage of Atlantic's new chief diversity officer, Dr. Gabrielle Turner, a respected scholar in organizational equity, speaking at a press conference. This isn't about checking boxes, Dr. Turner was saying. This is about fundamental cultural change throughout our operations. Vanessa smiled slightly as she muted the television. The aftermath of her stand against Atlantic had been both more challenging and more rewarding than she had anticipated. The initial public reaction had been deeply divided. Many had praised her courage in using her position to force accountability for discrimination that would have otherwise been ignored. Technova standoff had trended for days, with thousands sharing their own experiences of discrimination in spaces where they didn't belong according to someone else's prejudiced view. Others had criticized her methods, arguing that disrupting air travel for thousands of passengers was disproportionate retaliation for a personal slight. Several opinion pieces had questioned whether she had abused her company's power, setting a dangerous precedent for tech providers to hold critical infrastructure hostage. The FAA and Department of Transportation had launched investigations into both Atlantic's discriminatory practices and Technova's use of system diagnostics. Ultimately, they had cleared Vanessa of wrongdoing, acknowledging that the diagnostic procedure was within contractual rights, while issuing a formal warning to Atlantic Airways for systematic violations of anti-discrimination laws. Richard Whitman hadn't fared as well. The evidence of his orchestrated harassment had led to his resignation from Legacy Aviation amid a separate investigation into corporate sabotage. His replacement had taken a notably more collaborative approach with Technova, focusing on legitimate competition rather than underhanded tactics. A knock at her office door interrupted Vanessa's thoughts. It was James, her CTO. "The new implementation is ready," he announced. "Atlantic's updated training protocols have been integrated into FlightSync's onboarding module. Every employee who accesses the system will now complete anti-bias training as part of their certification. Excellent, Vanessa nodded. And the tracking metrics? In place, James confirmed. We'll have anonymized data on how staff interact with passengers across demographic categories. Any statistical anomalies will trigger automatic reviews. This technical solution to bias monitoring had been Vanessa's idea, using Atlantic's dependency on flight sync as leverage not just for punishment, but for ongoing accountability. The airline had initially resisted what they called surveillance, but had eventually recognized it as both necessary and potentially valuable for their own risk management. There's something else, James added, smiling slightly. The Educational Foundation is ready to launch 20 full scholarships for minority students in aviation technology, funded by the international investment we secured. The Technova Future Aviator Scholarship had been Vanessa's way of transforming her experience into opportunity for others. Rather than focusing solely on punitive measures against Atlantic, she had channeled resources into creating pathways for underrepresented groups to enter the field. Later that afternoon, Vanessa walked through O'Hare International Airport, headed for her flight to San Francisco. The terminal looked the same as it had a month ago, but subtle differences were apparent to her trained eye. The staff was noticeably more diverse. Signs in multiple languages directed passengers to customer service representatives, specifically trained in addressing discrimination concerns. As she approached the premium check-in counter, she recognized a familiar face, Jessica Reynolds, the flight attendant who had treated her dismissively during the infamous flight. Jessica looked up, recognition and alarm flashing across her face as she saw Vanessa. "Good afternoon," Vanessa said pleasantly, presenting her first-class ticket and ID. Jessica hesitated, clearly expecting confrontation or perhaps retribution. After all, Melissa and Cameron had been fired. Why not her? "Ms. Mitchell," Jessica finally managed, her voice unsteady. I want to apologize for how I treated you on that flight. There's no excuse." Vanessa studied her for a moment. "You're right, there isn't, but there is room for growth." Jessica looked surprised at this response. "I've been through the new training program," she offered hesitantly. "It's made me realize how many assumptions I was making without even knowing it." "Awareness is the first step," Vanessa acknowledged. "But it's what you do with that awareness that matters." "I understand if you want to report me," Jessica said, bracing herself. Vanessa shook her head. "Punitive measures alone don't create lasting change, Ms. Reynolds. Sometimes what's needed is the opportunity to do better once you know better." She collected her boarding pass and added, "I hope you'll extend the same grace to others who don't look like you expect them to in first class." As Vanessa walked away, she felt a sense of closure. This wasn't just about one incident or one airline. It was about challenging the countless small indignities that accumulated into systemic injustice and using power, when one had it, to create accountability where it had been absent. Boarding her flight, Vanessa was greeted respectfully by a diverse flight crew. The captain, a black woman, personally welcomed her aboard with a knowing smile that spoke volumes. As the plane taxied for takeoff, Vanessa looked out at the runway where a month ago, 152 flights had stood grounded by her decision. The cost had been high, $2.1 billion in losses, weeks of media scrutiny, and hard questions about the intersection of corporate power and social justice. But as she watched an Atlantic Airways plane take off ahead of them, bearing the company's new slogan, "Everyone belongs in the sky," she knew it had been worth it. Sometimes, meaningful change only came when the cost of discrimination became higher than the cost of doing right. What do you think about Vanessa's approach to fighting discrimination? Was using her company's power justified, or did she go too far? Comment below with your thoughts on whether systemic change requires dramatic action or can happen through more gradual means. If you've ever had to make a difficult choice between speaking up or staying silent in the face of injustice, share your experience. Don't forget to like this video if Vanessa's story resonated with you, subscribe for more powerful true stories about standing up against discrimination, and share this with someone who needs to hear that sometimes you have to use your power to create the change you want to see in the world. Thank you for watching, and remember, your dignity is non-negotiable. This powerful story teaches us that sometimes lasting change requires courageous action. Vanessa Mitchell faced what countless Black professionals experience daily: the subtle yet devastating impact of racial discrimination. Rather than accepting the injustice, she leveraged her unique position of power to force accountability where traditional methods had failed. The lesson isn't just about fighting back. It's about understanding that systemic problems require systemic solutions. When institutions protect discriminatory behavior because it costs them nothing, making that behavior expensive becomes necessary. Vanessa didn't just seek personal vindication. She created mechanisms for ongoing accountability and opened doors for others through education and opportunity. This story also highlights the difference between having power and wielding it responsibly. Vanessa used her leverage not for revenge, but for meaningful change that would benefit others facing similar discrimination. She understood that true justice isn't about punishment alone, but about creating systems where dignity is non-negotiable for everyone. What would you do if you had the power to change an unjust system? Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wished you could do something about it? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more powerful stories about standing up against injustice. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that their dignity matters and should never be compromised. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the most powerful act is refusing to accept the unacceptable.